The Trump administration says it will send more than $11 billion to states, territories, and tribes to help increase testing capacity. During an event in the Rose Garden Monday, the president announced FEMA will also supply nearly 13 million swabs to states by the end of the month. Mr. Trump says the U.S. now conducts more than 300,000 tests per day. The president then touted what he said was progress compared to other countries, but confirmed coronavirus cases here now top 1.3 million. More than 80,000 Americans have died. Our Weisha Zhang asked him about those numbers.
He said many times that the U.S. is doing far better than any other country when it comes to testing.
Yes.
Why does that matter? Why is this a global competition to you if every day Americans are still losing their lives and we're still seeing more cases every day?
Well, they're losing their lives everywhere in the world. And maybe that's a question you should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China that question, okay? When you ask them that question, you may get a very unusual answer. Yes, behind you, please.
Sir, why are you saying that to me specifically?
I'm telling you, I'm not saying it specifically to anybody. I'm saying it to anybody that would ask a nasty question like that.
That's not a nasty question.
Please go ahead.
Why does it matter?
Okay. CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins me now. Major, good to see you. Let's start with that exchange between the president and our colleague Weisha. Why is the president ramping up his rhetoric, blaming China for this outbreak?
Well, there are many dimensions of the president's reaction to COVID-19. One of them is to isolate China and then to shift blame from decisions not taken in February and March that could have been taken. And had they been taken, the United States would have been much better prepared to deal with COVID-19 if the administration had, for example, ramped up testing then as opposed to April and May or late March when it began that process, or in let's say February or March, ramped up federal purchasing of personal protective equipment and things that would have been crucial to frontline healthcare providers. It did not do any of those things. But having said all of those things, and those are conspicuous and well scrutinized decisions not made by this administration that have made the spread of COVID-19 worse, it is also true, and this is one of the hard things, Elaine, about this story. Two things can be true at the same time, one that reinforces a Trump administration message and one that does not. I just disclosed the one that does not, meaning decisions not taken in February and March that could have been very helpful. That doesn't let China off the hook. China didn't do things that it was bound to under its treaty obligations with the World Health Organization. It was not transparent. It suppressed information. It intimidated people who had it. And there is a trail of uncontrovertible evidence that in certainly December and January, and possibly earlier, China knew more than it disclosed, and that reluctance, that unwillingness to share what it knew with the world made this pandemic far worse. That is an incontrovertible about that fact is going to be a big part of the future of the U.S.-China relationship for years, no matter who wins this next presidential election. Now, there is a particularly intimate part of that question and answer that goes to Weisha, because as some people may know, and if you don't know, I'm about to tell you, she is of Chinese descent, raised in West Virginia, American citizen, all that. But there is sensitivity about all of these things, and blame shifting or scapegoating to Chinese people or people of Chinese extraction here in the United States. Weisha is sensitive to that, everyone in that ethnic group, and those not, but similarly from Asia, for example, who might be implicated in this hostile atmosphere that COVID-19 has created for people from that region or from China specifically. That's another dimension of this. And it's worth pointing out that right after that exchange, the president just abruptly ended the question and answer session entirely, maybe feeling he had stepped into an area that he was no longer comfortable with, and the press conference was going to get more contentious and tougher, and he just ended it.
Right. It was a rather abrupt ending after that exchange with Weisha. Major, we also heard the president tout the testing capacity in the U.S. How do his statements on testing actually line up with what health officials and governors are saying?
Well, health officials, public health officials and governors would like more capacity and more ability to do more tests more rapidly. But what the president and Admiral Gouar, who is the public health official most responsible for building testing capacity and having it distributed to the states through the Federal Emergency Management Agency and Health and Human Services, also said things that are true, which is this: our capacity is increasing and has been increasing at an accelerating rate. And that's true, and that's a positive sign. And the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has authorized more and different kinds of tests, giving emergency use authorizations. That's a technical term, but it's important for the legal regulatory rules around testing. All of those things are true. And the testing capacity is sufficient for very gradual, very cautious phase 1 reopening. But Elaine, that's not the central issue for this country. We cannot economically recover anything like we once knew in phase 1. We just can't. It's too cautious. It's too small. Everyone knows that. Every small business, every large business, everyone that's trying to contemplate a full-blown or near full-blown reopening knows you have to have much larger industrial scale testing of many, many millions every single day to reopen and reassociate people, whether in colleges, universities, big workplaces, small businesses, sporting events, concerts, anything. To get to that level of normalcy, what we used to call normal, you have to have much higher capacity of testing right now. The administration says everyone who needs a test can get one, but their needs definition is pretty limited. Do you have symptoms? Are you part of a contact tracing process? Well, okay, those are two important categories. But to get this country and our economy beyond phase 1 and into phase 2 and phase 3, where we're much more vigorous in our interactions and our commerce is much more like it used to be, we need a much higher level of testing, not only in capacity, but processing. And when the administration is sending $11 billion, it's admitting that capacity isn't there. When it's saying to the country that in the month of May, it's going to send out 12 million more swabs to the states, and according to my notes here, 9 million more transport medium to hold the test and get it to the right place, it's essentially conceding that we don't have the capacity need to dramatically ramp up economic activity and human engagement, both of which are vital to getting to phase 2 and phase 3.
Before we let you go, Major, I was really struck by the change in protocols that we saw. And I know for you, as someone who's covered many a White House briefing, how different was what we saw today in the Rose Garden and in the West Wing in general, given, the fact that you had correspondents wearing masks, you had, instead of the passing of the microphone, you had them coming up to the microphone. What is your sense of what you saw, not just in the Rose Garden, but what we know is taking place in the West Wing as well?
It's a very important question because leadership in public health matters requires those at the highest, most visible level to send the right signals. And that's not an editorial comment from me. I'm just quoting public health officials who've said that every single day from the beginning of COVID-19. And what you saw in the most visible place politically and from an intervention point of view, the White House today, was something we hadn't seen before. Every reporter spaced well out. Now, that there's been spacing before. Every reporter spaced out in the Rose Garden, everyone wearing a mask. That hadn't been seen before. The president at one point motioned all of his senior aides and other White House personnel in the colonnade. They were all wearing masks. Hadn't seen that before. And again, to your point of this microphone going around or a boom mic being put over each questioner to get the question recorded properly, now you go to a mic and there's a lot of spacing around you. And two different podiums set up, one for the president, one for Admiral Guar, and another official with the Department of Health and Human Services named Brad Smith. So they weren't even getting anywhere close to the president. That's also new. So all of these things are very new. Why? Because there have been positive tests within the West Wing itself. And the vice president wasn't there. He is typically there. He is the leader, the designated leader of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, not visible there at all. Why? Because last Friday, his spokeswoman, Katie Miller, who is the spouse, by the way, of senior White House advisor Stephen Miller tested positive for COVID-19. So many more precautions are being taken place starting this day in the White House. More masks, more distancing, a much deeper culling of who can see the president and for what reason, and his interaction with people. It's being dramatically scaled back. Or if not dramatically scaled back, there is a much higher set of obstacles you have to go through to prove you are worthy of seeing the president and there's no danger involved. And as Kevin Hassett, a senior economic advisor to the president, said, it's scary. How could it not be? This is a highly protected place with tremendous amount of testing and a lot of precautions. But even those precautions are being ramped up. So you have a clash of the White House saying, governors, you need to safely but continuously reopen your economies. And people, don't be nervous. Don't be overly anxious about susceptibility or transmissibility. And even so, brand new precautions, much more pronounced, much more visible, are there at the White House, the most visible place in America, communicating what is or is not happening in the COVID-19 pandemic. And things are happening at the White House that haven't happened before, and they are on the protective side, the, oh, wow, it really is out there, it is transmissible, anyone can get it side of the equation.
Right. Those would seem to be two very different, some would say competing messages. All right, Major Garrett Forrest. Major, great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.